Raise your hand if you have completed a TV script. At least one. Raise your hand if you have completed one feature script. Okay. Raise your hand if you're just here because you're just trying to get some information, you don't really know what you're doing, you're just figuring it out. Yeah, right. We're all just figuring it out. So I'm going to start off by asking you guys about just the physical space of the writer's room, because there's different ways that we can set it up. Some rooms are, you know, couches or a conference table. Some rooms are whiteboards, some rooms are cards. Tell me about your ideal writer's room situation. What's your favorite setup?
I mean, I'd like to be the person who can just lie on the couch and get things done, but that hasn't been so successful. So I do like a table. I like, you know, whiteboards, as much whiteboard space as possible for people to write on and throw up index cards. I like and have only worked in small writers' rooms because I've worked mostly cable shows.
How many people in there?
The biggest one has been, you know, a 9. Most of them have been more like 5 or 6. And probably my favorite writer's room as far as physical space was the show I worked on, Blunt Talk, and the showrunner, Jonathan Ames, was renting a house, and he had a pool, and we kind of did the writer's room in his basement. But we also had pool privileges. So that was pretty nice. Yeah, we got a lot done there.
It's funny, our first writer's room, by the way, was in our producer's garage that he converted into a writer's room next to his pool. But it was too cold to get in the pool.
Yeah. That's fun.
I mean, I like a conference table setup. I just think it's it's just a nice official workspace. It gets everybody in the right mindset. I'm fighting an uphill battle as I go into different circumstances to get the way that we collect information in a writer's room a little more technical. I despise whiteboards. I think it's like literally the worst way now to capture ideas. You know, when you're moving fast, I actually want to set up a writer's room that is kind of based on screens and Google Docs, because a lot of times when there are a bunch of writers in a room and they all have pitches and they all have ideas, you know, if you get a Google Doc, it's a real-time instrument, and you got 2 writer's assistants trying to get everybody's ideas. But those people can write down their own ideas, and then if you miss something, you know, you'll have a record of it, because, you know, especially in the comedy space, my gut is always like the first idea is the best idea. So when you're in a room and, you know, somebody pitches a joke and everybody laughs, then this thing happens where everybody starts to, you know, get different versions of it, and then at some point you get lost in the woods and you can't remember what the thing was. And it's like go back to that thing that made everybody laugh. That's probably the one. So that's kind of what it is for me.
Yeah, I've been surprised by how analog this industry is and sort of resistant to change. So I'm glad to hear that you're pushing that way, because I tend to agree.
It takes a lot of time to organize a whiteboard by hand.
Yeah, and
erase it and redo it.
I mean, and it's a good thing to have. I mean, at some point, having physical cards that you can move around, it's a nice thing to be able to do. But the process of just getting all of the information down in real time, digital is much better. You know?
It all ends up there anyway. By the end of the day, the writer's assistants have to write everything down so you can review it. So why not? I guess that's true. Why not just write it down first? Yeah. And then it's done. And then go home earlier.
Right. Exactly. So then I want to kind of talk about sort of all the people, all the jobs. So kind of starting at the bottom. So I'll kind of give you guys a, you know, sort of a little layer of how that goes, and then you can kind of fill in your experiences of how you got to any of these jobs. So just to kind of throw it out there, this may be new information for you. I apologize if it's a repeat, but a lot of people haven't heard this stuff before. So on a show, you generally have a writer's PA starting at the bottom. You don't always have a writer's PA, but if you do, that person is running around, you know, running errands, picking up lunches, making copies, making coffee, all that just good writer's PA stuff. That is where I started. And then you can become the writer's assistant or the showrunner's assistant. Showrunner's assistant, you're kind of stuck to their desk. You're working on stuff for them in particular. the writer's assistant, you're generally in the writer's room and you're taking notes, you're taking everything down. It's a lot more stressful, I would say, on a comedy than on a drama, because sometimes your screen will be up on a big display and they're actually watching you type in the jokes and people are yelling at you, and it's a lot. So I would advise try to be a writer's assistant on drama if you're sort of back and forth. Then there's the script coordinator. That's the person who is putting in all the script changes, clearances, the names. That was what I did for like 7 years. So it's kind of masterclass because you're reading all the versions of all the scripts and you're putting out all the changes. You're kind of the liaison between the writers and the production. Then you can finally get staffed. Some people are never assistants. I think it's great to be an assistant because you kind of get to appreciate how it works. So the writing level goes like this. You start out as a staff writer, and after that, the next jump you make is to story editor. None of these titles mean anything or make any sense, but everybody just knows what they are. Then you become an executive story editor. Then you become a co-producer. Then you become a producer. Then you become a supervising producer. Then at some point, there's this like consulting producer, like arm thing over here that comes at this point or maybe higher, which is where your rate is being protected by only taking 3/5 of your quote because you're only working 3 out of 5 days. It's a lot of nonsense, but consulting producer.
Cable, it means they won't pay you your quote. They don't have enough money.
Yeah.
And you don't want that amount to become your quote for the title you take. So you call yourself a consulting producer, but you do work all 5 days. You just make less than you should make, and that's sort of how you tell everyone you're doing that.
Yes, it's the code. Yeah, and then co-executive producer, co-EP they call it usually, and then executive producer. Sometimes the executive producer, is the showrunner. Sometimes the executive producer is also or the creator. Sometimes the executive producer is just a writer who's been on the show for a very long time, or just comes in with a heck of a resume and they garner an AP credit from the beginning. So that's the hierarchy within the room, and everybody kind of knows who everybody is, but it's not like co-producer comes with these job requirements or these job responsibilities. It's sort of specific to the show, and I've been the only mid-level writer on my last 3 shows. So it's been like all top people, all low-level people, and then just like me hanging out in the middle. So there's not like one of each on any given show. It can be any mix of things, but that's just to kind of give you the idea. When you hear all these weird titles and you watch credits for shows at the beginning, you see all those producer titles. Half of them are writers. One of them's some random person who made one introduction 9 years ago. It doesn't always mean like produced by is the only one that means the line producer. So like I said, I came up as an assistant. I was an assistant for a long time, finally got a freelance script, and then spent another 3 years as an assistant, and then finally got staffed on Army Wives. So it took me a very, very long time. It's not a prescription. It's not saying that's how long it will take you or that's the path in. That's just my particular path in. How about you guys talk a little bit about your paths in as they relate to this world and outside this world?
I didn't do any of that.
There you go.
No, literally, I had my first credit was, if I recall, I was an executive story editor, and then my next credit was executive producer. Wow. Because I was a comedian. And so, my path into the business came from a different route. So I had done work. I worked on the Chris Rock show when it was on HBO. And I'm talking about scripted versus, comedy variety, which is what that show was. So, when I was working on that show, we're doing sketches and bits and stuff like that, and I did some on-camera work. And then when I got a job on the scripted show, which was the Gregory Hines show on CBS in, 2000 or 1998, something, I don't remember the year. My first credit was executive story editor. I did not work on another show in another writer's room until we did Everybody Hates Chris, which I co-created with Chris, and then I was an executive producer and a showrunner. I wish I would have had some of the intermediary steps because, showrunner is a crash course in everything.
In crashing.
Oh my God! I mean, the ways that you can go wrong are, it's a rabbit hole of bad decisions.
99% of the ways you can go are wrong.
And sometimes it ends up really tough. Frankie. Who's the woman who did Smilf?
Frankie Shaw.
Frankie Shaw.
Yeah.
I feel for her because she just had a really unfortunate experience with her show, and there was a big blow up around it. But the business of running this multi-million-dollar business with no training is, it's a lot of stress and whatever. So if you can move through that process, that's fantastic. But sometimes it goes other ways.
Yeah. Rich and I had we're writing partners, and we had a similar thing to you. We were actors first and had done a lot of work producing things independently, directing, acting in things that we did, and writing things that we did. And then we won the New York Television Festival for a spec script that we wrote, which is not, a normal path to anything. But we did that, and we ended up with a development deal at Fox, which was not really anything.
We never met anyone
at Fox.
We met
so
them the day we
weird.
won, and then we got the prize money for winning.
Right.
And then every 2 months they were like, "We're gonna bring you in
have a
soon to
meeting."
talk to you and
But-
see your faces." And
Right,
they
but the
didn't
good
do it.
thing about it was because we had won this thing and because we had a development deal, some of the things that we were pitching around, people started caring that we were going to come in and pitch them. And
Same pitch that nobody wanted to hear the week before.
Yeah.
People were like, "That's a dumb idea."
Yeah.
And by the way,
And
some of
then
them were
it
dumb
was
ideas.
totally dumb. But we were like, okay, well, now that we won this thing, does that matter? Could we get in more rooms? And apparently it did. And we ended up selling our first show to CW Seed, which was CW's online platform.
Still is.
Still is. And they gave us, they bought 66 minutes of content from us to make whatever kind of like web series type thing we wanted. And Rich and I were like, well, we don't want to be web creators. We want to be, broadcast TV writers. So we made 3 22-minute full episodes. And
They could be subdivided into 6 11-minute episodes for the web. So it was basically a 4-act, 22-minute episode where acts 1 and 2 had it to be continued in the middle of them if they were going to air them
if they were going to air them online, and they did not air them online, they ended up picking them up to the network, which again, totally weird. Not something that normally happens.
But we were so naive, we were like, it's definitely going to happen. And I think that positivity...
Yeah,
it
totally.
yeah.
We're like, we're making a TV show and it's going on air.
Yeah.
Like, that's what's happening. And it actually did, which was insane. And so on our first show that was on air, we were executive producers. Because we created it and we wrote all 9 episodes of the first season.
And that only happened because when we sold the digital show, our lawyers were like, we're going to get you EP credit on the TV series when that happens. And Warner Brothers was like, that's not going to happen. We'll totally give you that credit. And then it happened, and then Warner Brothers was like, well, they can't be EPs. They've never done anything. And our lawyers were like, yeah, that was really dumb of you guys to agree to. But it turns out they're going to be EPs on the show. And
it was really just us and our producer, who was our showrunner partner, kind of. Then we did this whole, it was super low budget, but we did a whole season of television, pretty much just the 3 of us. And so it was boot camp, and it was insane. And not a lot of people watched the show, but it was great because it was a great way that we could learn while doing, which is not something that, everybody gets the opportunity to do. So we were very fortunate.
And we did jump back in between that and our next show, Life Sentence, that was on CW, which also not a lot of people watched, but I liked it. I thought it was
Not a lot of
pretty
people
decent.
watch the CW.
Yeah. But in the middle, we went back and...
Live.
But
Everyone watches it on Netflix.
Yes. Yeah, don't bite the hand that feeds
I know,
us.
I love it.
But we had...
Scratch that.
But we had a similar experience too, where we hadn't actually even been in another person's writer's room at all. So we ended up staffing for a season on Fuller House because that was available and fit in time-wise. Because we just wanted to be in a room and see how it worked and see, as somebody who wasn't running the room, how we wanted to be treated, how other people in that room behaved, and what was sort of a positive environment to create in and what was negative. And so we did that and took away a lot of positives and a few negatives and applied as much as we could when we moved on to Life Sentence. But it's still very scary to run your own show, no matter how much experience you have.
Yeah.
I started as a writer's assistant on, if anyone remembers, Queer as Folk on Showtime. And when I got the job, I don't even think I had a TV. I was very focused on movies, and I didn't realize what a kind of a great job and a great stepping stone a writer's assistant job was. So I feel like in some cases I took full advantage of it. In some cases I wish I had taken more advantage and had kind of pitched myself as a writer for the show. Instead, I was more leaving my feature spec scripts around for my showrunners to read and hoping they were going to like introduce me to some people. One great thing about the show was I was kind of the gatekeeper for writers reading their specs, and so I got to know a lot of agents, and that's how I found a feature agent. In season 2 of Queer as Folk, I left and I got my first job, which was writing a movie. Studio movie, and I got into the Writers Guild, and I felt like I had like made it, and that I was home free, and I was, anyway, that movie never got made, and that process repeated itself for a couple of years, until maybe 5 years, until I realized like, oh, writing movies and not getting them made isn't that much fun. Around the same time, I did have a TV then, and then I was watching more TV, and I was like, God, I'd rather watch 2 episodes of Mad Men than half the movies I'm going to see. So I made the jump to TV a little before kind of, I feel like there was like a rush of feature writers moving into TV, so maybe this was like 2008. And because I came from features, I feel like I was kind of welcomed a little bit with open arms in the TV world, and I did a couple, sold a couple scripts to ABC. Those went nowhere. Sold a bunch of things. Felt like, oh, I like this already, because I just felt like I wasn't being kind of replaced by the director. I liked TV immediately. Oftentimes you go to a meeting with a producer and you pitch them your idea. They're like, they pass, but sometimes they have an idea for you. In most cases, their idea, at least for me, is usually terrible, or it's like something nobody else wants, or it's like but in this case, the producer was like, hey, we want to do a show with Mark Maron, and I was like, I love Mark Maron, and they're like, okay, and I think he'd met with a few writers, and nobody had clicked, so I met with him, and I was a fan of the podcast, and we got along, and it was a little bit of a unique situation where they were, the producer was putting up a certain amount of money to shoot a sizzle reel, and was looking for someone to, write some scenes with Mark. I think they wanted to see if he could act, if the show would feel different than Louis, just what it would look like. And in my case, I felt like if I'm going to write something, may as well try and write a whole pilot. I think my ignorance about how little money we had actually served me in this case, where I was like, well, $30,000, that's a lot of money. Should we just like shoot a pilot? And we had a wonderful director and a great, this was Dennis Leary's production company. They produced it, and we shot this thing over 2 days. And they used that as the sales tool, and they sold the show Maron to IFC. So in that case, I got to go, I spent 6 years in like the movie trenches, but I also got to go from a writer's assistant on Queer as Folk, then to one of the EPs on Maron. So not a showrunner, but an executive producer, because I helped create the show, and they paired me with a showrunner. Showrunners, in this case, was a writing partners. And it was a great first room for me, because I hadn't worked in a writer's room before, besides being an assistant 10 years before. So everything was very new. So it was just me, the comedian and the star, Mark, and the showrunners. And there were a lot of things I didn't know, but since I knew the comedian star the best and kind of could write in his voice, that was kind of my strength that made up for the things I didn't know. And that was kind of how I broke into TV.
Great. So you can see a wide-ranging. So just follow these paths.
Your own path.
Our first season of Everybody Hates Chris in particular was interesting, because I was sitting with Chris and really getting a lot of firsthand anecdotal, stuff from him, and I've known him for a very long time. So that was, I was able to kind of suss out of him certain little anecdotes, ideas, and these little strains of things that we would kind of build story around. But then after that, it really kind of became, how do we invest ourselves in the television version of this family? These are not all straight real life Chris anecdotes. So now, you start kind of going around the room and finding out things that happen to other people in their families. And, so our first season was kind of tough, as we kind of got the foundation. But the second season of that show brought in another showrunner, a guy named Don Rio, who did, what was Damon Wayans' show
Which
on
one?
ABC?
Yeah.
My Wife and Kids, yes. And, you know, Don's done a bunch of stuff. I mean, he's worked, you know, like on Blossom and Sanford and Son. I mean, like literally like an old pro. Like a guy that shows up at 10 in the morning and he's leaving at 6, and, you know, and it's like, you know, writing television is a job. And so in our second season, he was incredibly helpful to me because instead of doing this kind of, you know, this meta experience where we search through and try to find stuff, we literally put up a board, ABC stories, and literally came up with 100 log lines of stories. So we had 3 main characters who were the kids, which was, we had the Chris character, the mom and the dad. There was a younger brother and a sister, and then we had side characters. So we take the Chris character and go, Chris gets in a fight. Chris steals some money. Chris breaks down the car. And then we do another B story. You know, mom is too sleepy to cook. Dad does this. We just did, and so then we just really started.
Mom's too sleepy to cook.
Like literally it was that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we went through all of these stories. We had a ton of them up on the wall, and it was actually it became problematic on the network side because we had 8 weeks. We had 8 weeks of pre-production, and by the time we finished the 8 weeks of pre-production, we had 14 scripts. And the network wanted us to slow down because they were like, we don't have time to read all this stuff and whatever. But you're dealing with a small budget. And when you're dealing with a budget like that, the more you know as you're going into this season, the more able you are to deal with how you're going to spend the money. Right? This is all showrunner stuff. Right? And then but they would say, well, we don't know if we have a story on this show that's going to do this or on this show that's going to do that. And I'm like, yeah, but you know we have one that's
So
doing it.
then tell everyone else.
So tell
no.
everyone else not to do what we're doing instead of trying to get us to not do what somebody else might do.
Yeah, what they haven't even thought of yet.
No.
Yeah.
Like we actually have the scripts right here, right now. So, I mean, that was just kind of way. And then when you get in, the more time you have to work on your material, the more time you have to ask yourself questions about where's the story, what's the nuance, what do I kind of get out, is very, very different from my sitcom experience, my multicam sitcom experience, where they got a screen up on the wall, everybody's throwing jokes, you know, it's Monday, it's going to go on the floor on Wednesday, they got to do a whole bunch of meetings, and you're scrambling down to the floor trying to figure stuff out all the time. It just felt like we were able to do something that I felt really good about because we had more front time to ask ourselves questions and then more time to set ourselves up to execute. You know, and then just wherever the stories come from with the writers, it's, you know, at some point you're delving into your own experiences and taking that into the show.
So what would you say, so the industry is constantly changing, the nature of writing is constantly changing, the nature of what is TV is constantly changing. What do you think at this moment is, what would you expect a writer to have? Like if you're going to staff up a room, what would you expect for them to have written, and what would you expect for them to have bring to the room in terms of personal
Somebody
experience
just
or story?
texted me this question yesterday.
It was me.
What did you have a good answer?
I don't know. Let me say it and then tell me if it was good or not. They were actually it was a friend of mine that I started out in sketch comedy and improv comedy, and she and I did sketch together. And she's trying to start writing more in TV now. She was an actress as well, or still is. And she was like, I want to write a spec of a current show. What should I write? And I said, don't bother. You can, but everybody wants to read original material now. I mean, at least in our experience when we wanted to staff, everybody we staffed, I don't think we read any specs of a show. Because especially nowadays, at least in my opinion, you want unique voices. You don't necessarily want just someone that can mimic you, especially as showrunners. You kind of end up having to rewrite everybody a little bit anyway because the show should be in one voice and that's yours. But you want a diversity of experience and background and character perspective. And so you can't really get that if you're reading a spec of a show that a writer is mimicking someone else's voice. And for us, we just didn't want a bunch of mimics. And so we hired a lot of people with different voices. Some of those ended up being great hires. Some of them were a little tougher, you know, in terms of you have to do more work rewriting them because they just can't mimic your voice. But they bring stuff to the room that somebody whose only skill is to copy what they hear you say and how you say it wouldn't bring to the room. So I think original material that's in the tone of the shows you want to work on is what you should have. And now, because half hour and hour aren't that different necessarily, if you sitcom, like multicam is its own thing, but if you want to work in hour dramedy or half hour cable like Weeds or Atypical, those scripts can cross over. If you have a great hour dramedy, a half hour dramedy, showrunner will read that and vice versa. I would say people will read features too, but generally if you're getting a bunch of submissions, the least amount of pages you can read to decide somebody's going to be great, the better. You know, if you have a 25-page script that sells you, it's much better than a 125-page script that sells you.
I mean, I would say for yourselves in terms of the practice, it is not a bad idea to write a spec script because it's kind of the thing that you said. It's like if you're in a band, the first thing you learn how to play is cover tunes. It's like, can you play songs, right? Do you know what a change looks like? Do you know what the starts and stops? Do you know what the rise and fall and the dynamics are of how a script works? So if a show already has that in place and you're kind of forced to write to that structure, then you can bring that skill set to voicing your own material. Because you can have an original voice that's kind of all over the place. But if you haven't written enough scripts to get a sense of how this is supposed to work, what an act break is, or what an act break might look like, or why a scene is long or short, or all of these kind of things that are devices in executing your material, you know, you're going to have 5 pages when I'm reading your script. I'm like, okay, nothing's happening here. All right, I'm not spending another 12 minutes reading this, right? Mm-hmm. So that is what you can learn by writing other shows that you like. You know, can you accurately kind of portray what somebody else created? Because that's still going to be your job. Mm-hmm. But you're going to have to do that job by bringing your voice or your experiences or your ideas to someone else's, you know, material.
And it's also good to have, if you had a spec script that you'd written for a show that you loved, that, you know, is the kind of show you'd want to be working on, and you had an original piece or several, because every show is going to have different requirements of what they want to read from you, and you don't want to be like, oh, I just have the one thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, you want to have a bunch of stuff so that if they say, oh, well, we really like this, but we're kind of not sure that they can write on this medical show. You want to be like, oh, I have a spec of Grey's Anatomy. Do you want to read that too? You want to be prepared for whatever is going to, I don't mean like write 100 scripts in every genre, because that's not going to be right for you. But if you're like, I like dramedy and I like medical and I like, I don't know, whatever, one other thing or something like that, then cover your bases a little bit for what you think is right for you.
Nurse Betty Grey's Anatomy Scrubs.
There you go, done. They're done. Yeah, something original and a spec of one of those two. It's great. Well, then you have a niche.
And also, I guess I'll dial back what I said a little, in that if you want to write on a medical show but you don't have a great medical idea, then do write a spec of a medical show. So like Erin said, you have that. Also, whatever you write, make sure the first act is really good, because we will not keep reading you past the first act if it's not interesting, or even if the characters are interesting.
5 pages.
5 pages, yeah. Well, because you guys have a cold open, we got to go through the first act in an hour drama. So
that cold open will get me to the first act.
Yeah, exactly. Or not.
But yeah, each 5 pages gets you to the next. And there were some people who were so good, you just read the first half and be like, we can meet them. I'll read the end of this at some point, but if it's that good, then you know you want to meet with the writer and see if they're a fit for your room.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just echo, I think, at least in cable, most of my experience has been reading originals. But it feels like more and more, especially because everything is so fractured, like it almost feels like you're just taking, it used to be like 10 years ago you could write a Seinfeld or a Frasier or something. Now it's like, how do you even know the showrunner reads this show? I mean, there's just so much there that you might choose to spec out that I just feel like writing an original might get you noticed a little more quickly.
Come and go so much faster now, especially with Netflix's new 3-season thing. You write a spec and then all of a sudden that show's been gone for 3 years before you know it.
Mm-hmm. I had friends that were talented writing partners. It took a few years to break in. I know they had done a couple pre-existing show scripts, and then they broke in with a script that was an original that would never get made. It was a little. It was so over the top. It was almost like an Office was almost like The Office, but in a sweatshop.
Oh my God.
It really got them noticed because people would just hear the log line. They'd be like, that sounds offensive and interesting. Let me read it. To the point where like I saw someone on a plane reading it, and I was like, that's my friend's script. So I think they kind of rolled the dice, and not only did they write an original, but they wrote something. They're like, we know this isn't going to get made, but it'll get read.
The only practical absolute use for a spec of an existing show now is the diversity programs. A lot of them still require a spec of an existing show. So that's something, if that's a route that you're sort of looking about going into, they all have their websites and they all have their requirements. I won't go down that path now because there's plenty of information out there about that, but those are places that do require a spec. I think some of them now require like a spec and an original. When I was coming up, they were all just specs, and now they have a list of what shows you can do because there's so many. But I will say, when you're writing an original sample, one of the things that sort of clicked for me after I'd written a few was this notion of don't worry about it getting made. This is not, a pilot can have two purposes. A pilot can be something for development, and you can think about down the road, and you can think about season 2, and you can think about the character arc and the character development. And a pilot can be a staffing sample, and it can live as a staffing sample its entire life and never be developed. I actually have a project right now that I wrote as a staffing sample with like sort of a maybe about development that's now in development. But that was not originally the plan. So I wrote this big flashy sort of thing that was going to get attention, that was going to get noticed. And now I'm realizing as I'm developing it, I have to pull some of that stuff out. It's not sustainable for the show. So when you write, feel free to write big and bold and crazy and whatever, and don't get so bogged down by what the plan is. I mean, they should be able to, they might ask you in a meeting, like, where do you see this going? Or you should be able to answer it, but don't like make a series Bible if it's a staffing sample. You know what I'm saying? Like, it can just be that. It can be loud and flashy and have a really great first 10 pages. Like, there's one sample where like I drown a toddler on page 10. They keep reading. It's awful.
Only you've done it on 5, he'd still be reading.
Right. Well, see, but I think comedy.
You did it on page 1.
In drama, you get to page 10.
Page 10 because it's a longer script. I think in comedy you only get to page 5. But I mean, and I'll say just from the stuff that I've not staffed a show, but I end up reading a lot of stuff just for people I mentor and things like that. For the love of God, whatever is happening in our culture in terms of texting, it should be in English. It should have punctuation. Words that should be capitalized should be capitalized. That little red squiggle means you spelled it wrong. For the love of God, treat your scripts like a written document that is not a text. I can't tell you how many scripts I'm seeing where there's no punctuation at the end of a sentence. I don't care if you text that way. That's not how we write this language. And if you're going to write in this language, I'll put it down. If you're doing nonsense with lowercase i's, unless it's like you're quoting like how someone is texting, I'm out. So just that's my like soapbox. Don't do it.
Appear educated.
Yeah.
Even
It
if
doesn't
not.
have to be highbrow, but it has to be like spell checked.
Yeah.
I'll offer you this just in terms of style. I've read a lot of scripts that are very high in style quotient because the writer is writing for the read. Right, their goal is to try to keep me engaged on the page by being insular and by being clever and by being meta and referencing things that are on the page, and that's all fine and dandy. But I know that it's kind of like functional bullshit, right? You're trying to do cool stuff so that it seems cool, but that's not cooler than actually writing a great line, describing a great character, painting a fantastic picture. I know what I'm just reading, and then on page 3, as I referenced before, on page, I don't know. Stop it. Like, just give me good content. Don't reference the content like the way you wrote it is cool, because that's not going to be the way that it's functionally seen.
Right.
It's going to be a TV show or a web series or a film or whatever it is. That's what I'm trying to picture. I'm not here trying to see how cool you can reference what you wrote 3 pages earlier. I don't care.
We actually read a couple samples, I'm just remembering now, when we were staffing Life Sentence, where I don't think we ended up meeting the people because we would talk about the script and say, if the actual content of what was going to be on screen was as entertaining as the action lines were, this would be cool. Like, and this writer is capable of that, but they're wasting their cleverness on something that does not ever make it on screen, which also shows that you don't understand that a script is just a blueprint for a TV show. It's not a book.
It would be like writing sheet music and saying what color the guitar is.
And any other advice you think in terms of making shorts, having a funny Twitter, whatever? Is there anything else, or do you think that it really is just about writing a good script and getting it out there?
I mean, I think the script is functionally sort of thing one, but you actually have to learn how to do that. And then, what door you get through. We were having a brief conversation about this earlier, with technology and, the boldness of youth, the doors keep moving. Right? So, if you were Issa Rae and decided to do, a YouTube series years ago, well, that happened. Now that door's closed, and then somebody does a clever string of tweets, and then somebody goes, oh, let's buy shit my dad says, and then that door closes, right? So it keeps moving, and then, Vine was up for a hot second, and somebody gets on because of that, and then somebody starts putting something in Insta stories, and, somebody, catches on to that, and you never know who's watching what you're doing. You never know how people are responding to it. So, I mean, it's like the floodgates are open, but with all of the people and all of the content that are rushing through, there are still some things. There are always things that are better than other things, right? So that's where the craft comes in. If you've spent time learning how to write, if you've spent time learning how to execute and craft your idea, and sustain an idea, once you get past that splashiness and you get through the door, when the dust settles, something good is going to be standing there. Issa Rae is on and she's doing well because she actually did a lot of content before she got a television show. Before it became Insecure, it was developed someplace else and it didn't work. So this long arc to success is exactly that. It's long. And you have to be able to sustain it because you've been putting time and effort and energy and work into your craft. And then, where the opening is going to be, I don't know. Could be a film festival, could be a contest, could be a random meeting, in a online thread. Could
and
be
also,
anything.
I would say to that point, don't chase what someone else's success was. Don't see like, oh, Andy Samberg made shorts, I'm just going to do that, if that's not something you're passionate about. Those people, anyone that you can think of that got in a weird way, had a really good idea that was a great fit for that medium that they put it on, and they were passionate about it. So if you're going to do something crazy and splashy to try to get your foot in the door, make sure it's something you're passionate about, and the only goal isn't just to be seen. That said, we're all, at least the two of us, are always looking for clever stuff that we can help get made, because then it's an idea we don't have to come up with. But you never know where you're going to see that. You might hear it on the radio. You might be on your friend's Instagram account looking at pictures. You never know. So don't chase being seen. Do something worthy of being seen, and someone will find it.
What's your, quick words of advice? And then we'll open it up to Q&A. So if you had the...
write a script, then write another script, and then write another script after that. Don't think that whatever you wrote is so good that you can just stop writing and focus on doing that. If you wrote it, finish it. Whatever you start, as best you can, finish it. Then, let some friends read it, whatever it is, and then move on. Whatever you think you've written now that probably feels good, might be good, but I absolutely guarantee you, whatever the next thing you do will be better. So write. Keep writing. Don't stop writing, because, that thing she did at the top where she goes, who here has a script? Who has another script? I want to see 3 scripts. Not because I care that they're all good. What I care about is that I know that you have enough energy, effort, and focus to keep writing, because that's TV. We did it last week. Now we got to do it again this week. Can you sustain the process of constantly coming up with stuff that 9 times out of 10 is not going to be used? That's the job. Get used to it. It's not about rejection. It's just about culling all of these sources to get to the thing that is going to be the best thing that you can think to use at the time you're going to do it.
That's great. Yeah, I would say, just to add on that, when you are coming up with what you want to do originally, Rich and I always ask ourselves, many questions before we settle on an idea, but the two most important is why you and why now. So why are you the person to write this script, to tell this story, and why is it relevant in our world today, in the huge landscape of television today? Why does the world need to hear this story? And I think if you can answer both of those questions before you start writing, you're going to be so far ahead of the game.
I also think for us, the thing we did is we always, I'm weirdly going to reference somebody who probably shouldn't be mentioned in public anymore, not Louis C.K., Matt Lauer. But it's an interesting story. I heard an interview with him back when people didn't know how creepy he was. And he was like a weatherman or a field reporter in rural North Carolina, and he had his like little small-time agent, and his agent was like, well, what are your goals? And he's like, well, I want to be on the Today Show. I'm going to host the Today Show. And his agent was like, right, but like, what's next? And he's like, whatever gets me one step closer to the Today Show. I will not take any job. I will not do anything. Don't set any meeting for me that doesn't put me closer to the Today Show. And so Erin and I have always sort of adopted that philosophy, which I will stop calling the Matt Lauer philosophy now. But
You call it the rural weatherman philosophy.
yes,
Rural
exactly.
There was once a rural weatherman.
Yes, the Today Show philosophy. But I think it's really important to know where you're headed. Like we did with when we got this digital opportunity, we knew that wasn't our end game, so we moved the goal line a little bit. So really think about what your end of your life goal is. And whatever you write, whatever you do, make sure it's moving in that direction. And then, if you're doing something funny online, then that'll be purposeful and it will get you there. And then instead of just trying to be seen for no reason, when somebody does see you, you have the 4 scripts that sell you and make somebody believe that, you have the capability to make this a TV show and you're not just funny here. So really know what your goal is and always be moving towards it.
Yeah, and I would just add as far as in terms of what are you going to write for your, first script, second script, third script, whatever it is. When I've been reading scripts for shows and for staffing, even if the script doesn't feel like it's completely successful or like completely there, I do feel like myself and the other producers have responded to things that feel like they are the writer's story. Whether it really is or not, just reading it and being like, oh, I want to meet this, meet this man or meet this woman. This feels like this is kind of their life. That really speaks volumes, where I feel like the person's really, putting themselves on the page in a way that makes it stand out from like the other scripts, whereas they're not trying to write something that feels like it's a version of something on TV already. There's just anything you can think of that feels personal to put in the script really, I think, speaks volumes and kind of makes me, even if the script isn't great, kind of makes me want to be like, oh, we should have this person in. I want to meet them. I would agree, not chasing trends is smart. I think if you do love podcasting, you have like an inclination there or a talent there, maybe you already have like the podcast setup, like doing some kind of narrative podcast or just doing something else, if you're passionate about it, is a good thing to think about. I still make short films, and sometimes the short films are like proof of concepts for a show I want to do or for like a movie I want to make. And I do it maybe not because it's always the smartest thing to do, but I'm passionate about making short films, and it's a great thing to have something that I've made. And that kind of keeps me going in that respect. So, yeah, there are many roads to Rome to kind of selling your show or getting yourself staffed.
Yeah, those are all really great. The one thing I will add, because it always feels like I like something that you can do that is active, that is cheap, and that is have a table read. I have always had a table read for everything I've ever written, all the way back to my very first, nobody should have read that, plays. And it's super easy. You literally just invite some actor friends over, and nowadays you don't even have to, print out the script. You can just have everybody bring an iPad or a laptop. Don't let people read on their phones. That's weird. But, and send them the script and just have them sit around and read it. And I would advise you don't read anything. You just listen. Have someone actually read all the stage directions out loud. Don't skip over those parts because that's part of the script. And you will hear so much. it's not even about the feedback you get from those people. It is about the experience of hearing it, because most of them are just going to go, oh my God, I can't believe you wrote something. I'm so proud of you. If you have like delightful friends, or you'll have that what an asshole friend that's like, I know what you should do. You know what you should do is don't listen. It's not really about feedback. It's about getting it so that you can hear it out loud, so you can hear where you're repetitive, so you can hear where things landed, especially if it's a comedy, you can hear where things are funny. And don't be precious with your material. Don't send out NDAs with your script. Don't do that. You know, register it with the guild, great. But really, everything's so electronic. If there's ever like a dispute if you're ever going to arbitration, you're not going to win. It doesn't matter. Nobody stole your idea. We're all drinking the same water and seeing the same billboards. Sometimes people have the same ideas. It's fine. You know, like, be smart about it, but don't be an asshole about it. If someone's going to read your script, don't make it hard for them to do that. Make it easy for them to do that.
Also, somebody's already had your idea.
For sure.
It's who gets there first. So if you have a great idea, stop telling people about it and go write it and get it out there ahead of the other person who had that idea. Because the first person there will win. If it's a really great idea and somebody reads yours first, right, somebody's going to make it before that other person finishes their script.
Yeah.